Now, the second thing that we need to deal with when doing action research will be the notion of role duality. Okay, the textbook did not define it, no? So I'm defining it for us. It refers to holding and performing dual, multiple, potentially conflicting roles as a full organization member and as an action researcher. So quoting Coughlin and Brannick, augmenting your normal organizational membership roles with a research enterprise can be difficult and awkward and can become confusing and overwhelming in some cases. The question is, how do you deal with competing commitments? So for instance, you are you're doing work for your organization, but you also want to do research because it's a requirement of the class. Okay, do you spend time within the work hours to work on your action research project, or do you work on it after office hours? Okay, that is a choice that you have to make. No? You can, of course, reason out, okay, by working on my action research project, I'm actually helping the organization. So therefore, there should be no issue about me using work hours because it's helping the organization. Okay, but no, that's actually being very simplistic about things. No? In some cases, maybe your action research project is not directly related to your specific job description, right? And therefore, the dilemma now becomes now it becomes a dilemma. It's not as easy, as the example that I gave you earlier. So again, quoting Coughlin and Brannick, in trying to sustain a full organizational membership role and the research perspective simultaneously, you are likely to encounter role conflict. Your organizational role may demand total involvement and active commitment on the job that you're doing, while the research role might in some cases demand a more detached, theoretic, objective, and neutral observer position, meaning that you might have to step back and let's say reflect upon your action, which could slow down things, or conversely, you can just take action as you would usually do without much reflection. But of course, there are certain risks involved in actually taking action very quickly without reflective, without something that will back you up in terms of better understanding of the situation. So things are not as straightforward in many cases, and therefore role conflict can emerge. Now, Coughlin and Brannick talks about role boundary, as, which is defined as the scope of a role. Role boundaries can be flexible and permeable. Okay, so the example they gave is this. In terms of doing action research, you may be in your office or at a meeting exercising your organizational role. So for instance, you're facilitating a meeting for your subordinates. So you are there in the office, physically and spatially, assuming that you're not work from home. But at the same time, if the issue that you are talking about has something to do with your action research project, it means that you must also be aware of your role as a researcher so that you can probe and ask questions that will also help not only in solving the problem of the organization, but also will serve the purposes of your research. Okay? So in some cases, these two roles might actually complement each other, but in some cases, you might have to be clear about, okay, what particular hat am I wearing? Okay, in this meeting, am I a manager or am I a researcher? Is it possible to merge both roles, or do I have to assume one role at this current point and then assume another role at another time? Okay, so those are questions that I cannot answer for you, but you would be in the best position to make such a judgment. Okay, so it will be ideal if you will be able to fulfill both roles while doing the same thing, but that will not always be possible. So what are the things that you need to do, okay, so that you can handle role duality properly? Number one, in first person, you must hold and value both sets of roles simultaneously, if possible. And then the process is catching internal responses to conflicting demands and dealing with them. Remember, when you're doing action research, you have to fulfill both your organizational and your researcher goals. But the question is, when do you put in the hat? Okay, when do you assume the manager role? When do you assume the researcher role? If you cannot do them simultaneously. Okay. Second, holding and managing demands of both roles, particularly in situations of conflicting role demands, which involves negotiating roles with significant others. Remember, when we talk about a role, that is in relation to other people. So you are fulfilling a role not for yourself, no? You're fulfilling a role in relation to others. So a manager is a role, meaning that you have people that are working under you. Okay. So if you're asking them to do their jobs, but you're also asking them questions for your action research, you're actually taking time off from them doing their jobs by pulling them in a meeting, asking them questions about diagnosing the situation. Do you see what I mean? No? In this case, there is a clear case of role conflict. Okay, they might not appreciate being taken off their job, especially if they are going to be evaluated, let's say in terms of their output. All right. Or if you decide, let's say, to meet them after office hours, they might not necessarily appreciate that also, because they should be going home rather than be attending a meeting to do the action research of my boss. Do you get what I mean? No? So now things become a little bit more concrete in terms of the role conflict that I'm talking about earlier. All right. And then, of course, no, we also have to find ways by which we can link a theory with practice. 4 challenges in role duality: knowing how to operate successfully within each role, translating ideas into the appropriate language for both the academic community, for which you are writing as a researcher, and also for the organization, okay, which you are trying to serve by addressing a particular issue or problem within that organization. And then learning to put different hats so that multiple roles are an asset rather than a burden. So it's a balancing act in many cases. In some cases, it's actually possible to reconcile both roles, no, or multiple roles, but that is not usual, and it requires a lot of skill for you to be able to do a reconciliation rather than a balancing. Okay,